We will start now, I guess. So hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us for the closing public program for the exhibition Liquid Ground. My name is Alvin, and I'm here with Julian, co-curator, and then Alice Wang, Tong Yixing, and Travis Jeppesen, who are three of the participating artists of the exhibition. This is a project that Julian and I conceived and submitted to Parasite at the beginning of 2020, before COVID, and selected as the emerging curator program back then. But you know, obviously the exhibition was postponed due to COVID, and then opened in August this year. Also due to the ongoing travel restrictions, I think none of us here actually were able to make it to Hong Kong for the exhibition. And I believe a lot of you here who are participating in this event probably also weren't able to see the show. And that's why we thought for the closing event, we'll have this conversation and then do a little guided tour, followed by a presentation by all the three artists in the show to talk about their practice, and then especially the work that they presented in the exhibition. Yeah, so I guess to start, Julian and I will just quickly walk through some of our thought process and the ideas behind the exhibition before we pass it on to the artist. I guess the exhibition really started with a lot of conversations that Julian and I were having around material transformation and energy. We're both very much invested in issues around environmental, the ecological meltdown. And so while we were conceiving this exhibition, we were really thinking a lot about entropy and material transformation. And that was the time when we came across this a very controversial land reclamation project named Lantau Tomorrow Vision, which is something proposed by Carrie Lam back in 2018 to reclaim reclaim 17 hectares of land in the southeastern part of Lantau Island to become the third largest economic hub by 2030. And when we were reading a lot of the kind of journalistic reports about the program, and we thought about how problematic it was on a lot of different kind of from various perspectives, sociological, environmental, and we started thinking like, how does this kind of large scale land reclamation project play and affect artistic production? If this land were to be reclaimed and become public land, what sort of art would be produced in these kinds of environments? Then we started looking into a lot of academic writings on the kind of development of art districts and the work of Ying Zhou, who some of you might have, if you participated in the previous public program event between Li Kai-chang and Ying Zhou. She's a professor of architecture at the University of Hong Kong. And back in 2017, she published her research on the development of West Kowloon Art District, which is also on reclaimed land, and its relation to the kind of technocratic piecemeal planning of the British colonial the British colonial legacy of Hong Kong's urban development. So with that in mind, we really wanted the exhibition to become a platform to engage artists and support new commission in a way, thinking about mobilizing, using the platform to mobilize the public to engage with this sort of urban development project that usually would go unnoticed. So right now, what we're seeing is some of the installation views. Perhaps Julian will share about some about the spatial design of the exhibition.
Yeah, so we have like sort of an overarching structure which resembles the shape of an island, but also has some functional purpose, which creates some rooms, so to say, for artworks that needs projection or enclosure for sound. And also the artworks that are placed kind of within the island and are like thematically coherent. They are dealing with sort of the theme of the island, which maybe I'll just go to the installation shot. Say for the work by Zhen Bo. So he lives on Lantau Island, especially during the COVID lockdown, and he was doing the kind of live drawings when he was going on walks during a lockdown, and those drawing on papers are his depiction of the faunas and the animals and plants that are local to Lantau. And next, also like developed around the theme of the island, which is in our conception of the exhibition, the island is like a liminal unit, which is isolated but open, and also self-sufficient. So the artist duo Zhen Ma Le consists of an artist and an anthropologist, Royce and Daisy. They are based on Lantau Island, and the project Bobolus Bobolus is when they are tracing the activity of the buffalo population living in Lantau Island. They collect field recordings and also produce this kind of technological devices, this buffalo ear-shaped mic, which can kind of mimic the sonic experience of the buffalo. But the provenance, the origin of this buffalo population on Lantau is very interesting in terms of they were domestic kind of laboring cow or buffalo during the agricultural boom in the 70s and 80s, which because Lantau is actually so-called the rice basket of Hong Kong. But after the 70s and 80s, there's a decline of agriculture in Lantau, and those buffalo and cow, they are like set free and become feral. So those feral buffalo, they are actually shaping the landscape of Lantau and turning areas of Lantau into like wetland ecologies. And this kind of animal-induced terraforming is something that artists are interested in. And also Travis' work, we'll save that for the artist. And the work, there's also collaboration between the duo Future Host and sculptor Heidi, which there's like very somatic, anthropomorphic shaped sculpture and a video produced with the sculpture on set, like in the environment, kind of invested the kind of queer ecology and this creation myth, almost like it's about the imagery of like Nuwa, the creator in the Chinese mythology, and also a lot of like body plugs and orifices in the sculpture, and the ceramics works with the video to add like this kind of non-anthropocentric and alternative cosmology, that component of the show. And I think next, there was also two works by Ria and Gary, which deals with like the kind of colonial legacy and the colonial aftermath related to islands. So Ria's work, Tellurian Drama, is about in the beginning, in the like late 19th century and the beginning of 20th century. So the Dutch colonial regime set up a very powerful radio transmitter in like West Java, but after the Japanese invasion, so the Dutch abandoned that site, and a lot of the radio equipment got kind of scavenged in a way, and the artists kind of traced the archives and like interview like radio aficionados local to West Java, and just to retell the story of this the fate of this powerful radio transmitter, and also add like there's also kind of a music performance scene and a local understanding of like mountain as a spiritual medium. And then Gary's work, Poius, is about maybe one of the earliest financial scams in 18th century, that a scammer sell bonds to like potential buyers in the London Stock Exchange about like a kind of a fairy tale about colonial, how can I put it, a very rich and pastoral place in Central America, which actually doesn't exist. So a lot of buyers buy this bond and embark on this trip, find them in like a nowhere, like close to Honduras. And so the work is, there's like a dollar bill and a computer generated landscape of a tropic island. Alvin, would you carry on from the?
Yeah, sure. I think perhaps if we go to an earlier slide where we can see more of the island structure, and then the entrance where we see Cuijie's work. So yes, for the show, we collaborated with this Guangzhou-based spatial designer and architect, and we came up with this idea to sort of build a floating island that sort of at one side closer to the office of the exhibition space would fall onto the ground to form the sort of a continental shelf where the island meets where the island meets sort of the water. And on the strand of kind of artistic infrastructure and developmentalism, we worked with artist Cuijie for this newly commissioned painting in the earlier slide that we were looking at. If we could go there, Julian. Yeah. So Cuijie, Cuijie is a painter based in Shanghai, and for quite a few years she's been looking into the kind of legacy of the late architect Chang Huanan, who is a Hong Kongese architect, and that was mostly active in the 70s and 80s. And but most of his architecture is buildings are actually all removed now, except for this one pavilion, which is you know, kind of referred to as the Rainfall Pavilion. When this pavilion was first built in the 1980s, it stood in the middle of an artificial lake, the design of which was a kind of homage to traditional Chinese garden design. Its roof was marked by hollow openings through which the rain could fall, and that's how it gained this, the name Rainfall Pavilion. But at the turn of the century, by order of the Hong Kong government, both the lake and the roof's hollows were filled in, a sort of kind of utilitarian alteration in response to Hong Kong's land shortage. And Cuijie was very much interested in this kind of the redesign of this pavilion and how that relates to the kind of exhibition theme of liquid ground. So in this painting, she sort of restored this this pavilion to its original design and then juxtaposed it with the statue of a goddess that was typical of the kind of style that arose overnight in the 1990s in mainland China as a sort of state endorsed symbol of progress and development. Within that strand, we also worked with actually, it's an organization that was founded specifically on the occasion of the exhibition that grew from a lot of conversations that we were having while we were building this proposal. I mean, obviously, neither Julian and I are based in Hong Kong. So when we were approaching this subject, we really wanted to work with local artists. And, you know, as Julian introduced Zheng Bo and Zheng Mala, we were not only like looking to work with Hong Kong-based artists, but also Lantau residents and use their insights and knowledge to expand our research. So some of the members of the Center for Land Affairs, including academics and artists, they have been doing ongoing research on the kind of greenwashing and art washing behind certain real estate giants in Hong Kong, including the New World, I guess, which is more well known in the art circle for also being the kind of owner of K11. So this particular work that the Center for Land Affairs presented was looking at the kind of real estate development scheme on Wan Chao Village, which is a village in the New Territories, and the kind of really dubious initiatives that the New World had, and just thinking about juxtaposing with these kinds of these initiatives and their employment, their engagement with contemporary art, to think about also as contemporary art practitioners and our sort of collusion with the real estate sector. In some of the other images, we will see closer to the continental shelf side of the exhibition, which is quite a few works. Also new commissions where we worked with artist Li Kai Chang. I guess for this work, Julian could share more.
Yeah, so so Kai Chong, he was interesting kind of the oranging of the sand that will soon be pulled into the Lantau and composed of the mega project of the land reclamation of Lantau Tomorrow Vision. And he traced, like after looking into like governmental archives, and he traced the origin of sand to Qingzhou in Guangxi. And he had like multiple field trips there. And the work is like, there's several components of a booklet and some diagram, a video clip, and this steel structure resembles the kind of the dredging devices, the structure used to extract sand from the seabed, and also the white like this pile of salt as the crystals he grows from his studio. And there's images of the drone footages of the extraction site he took during his field trip and his project onto the salt crystal. Yeah, I guess. And he's also there's also kind of analysis of this gigantic logistics network, because to accommodate the transportation of this a huge amount of sand, there's some also like sovereignty particularities, like how the borders dissolve and restructure during this kind of transfer of land, quite literally. So, and Lily's work, so she collects these sort of crumbling asphalt pieces during her kind of wandering in Hong Kong, and her treatment quite sculptural. she adds like kind of glittering material onto those asphalt pieces and make them, there's like a fossil-like quality, like technological fossil. It's almost like a future looking back at this uh, infrastructure, the materiality of our current infrastructure. Alvin, do you want to pick up from here?
Yeah, I think since we're already on that side of the continental shelf, maybe we can also talk about
Yeah.
work.
Really, yeah.
So it's a very short video that Rayan we showed of the Singaporean artist Ho Rayan. It's called Shell Revolution, and basically it in this, it's a silent 3D animation in which a sort of naturalistic looking seashell that's lying flat on the screen, it gradually turns upright and morphs into the current flattened version of the Royal Dutch Shell logo. So behind this shell is a high-speed aerial shot taken from Shellorama, which was a kind of, I guess, ideologically laden documentary short from the 1960s, celebrating the legacy of the multinational oil and gas company, Royal Dutch Shell. The super major, just a bit of history of this company. It was formed in 1907 through the merger of the Royal Dutch Petroleum Company and of the Netherlands and the Shell Transport and Trading Company of the UK. The latter of which actually started as a family business that imported and sold seashells. And a century later, Shell is now actively, one of the major companies that's reshaping the planet through rampant extraction while polluting air, water, and soil for profit. So while the original sequence from the documentary was intended as a kind of celebration of the fuel of globalization, the juxtaposition that Ho Rayan had in this video, it really sort of exposed what kind of lurked behind the oil industry's dream of speed and acceleration, a kind of abstraction of the natural world. So I think perhaps we'll pass. Oh yeah, maybe.
Yeah, there's one last one.
Sure. Yeah.
So so Jessica Castrick, she's an artist and DJ based in Beirut, Lebanon, and what's very special about like the club scene of Beirut is that all the new clubs are built on top of layer of landfill at the coastal area. And the landfill consists of like garbages imported or generated by the local, because the state capacity, the ability to manage this kind of waste and logistic maneuver is quite problematic in today's Beirut. And on top of this garbage landfill, there's a quite vibrant youth culture pulsating and growing. So she is very interested in this sonic energy brought by these youth culture, and also we knew the port explosion, like I think that's 2 years ago in Lebanon, and she wanted to channel this like sonic energy and turn this dance floor shaped platform into like a site of mourning and reflection. So there's like transducers or speakers built underneath the floor, and when the viewer stepped onto the floor, they can feel the vibration and the music. I think Alice work will save that for the artist.
That's very brief overview of our exhibition. I hope we coming from this kind of land reclamation project, we started thinking about how the participating artists can engage with the material histories of their respective locales. but also, tracing the root of this kind of developmentalism driving whether land reclamation projects or art district development to a kind of spirit for modernity. And we also started thinking about, in island and non-Western cosmologies, if there's some kind of entitles or ideas that can be thought and learned from there. And this is something that, in the works of Travis, and also in Yixing's work that sort of explored. And also, I guess Alice, being a sculptor and very much a formalist, had her very much personal interpretation of the exhibition theme. So we're very happy to have the three of them with us today, and they will each share a bit about their practice, and then we'll have a conversation afterwards. So I guess Travis will start, right?
So, hi everyone. Let me just see if I can share my screen here. I guess everyone can see that, right? So yeah, good afternoon. So Alvin and Julian thought it might be a good idea to sort of contextualize my commission for Liquid Ground in terms of kind of the larger scope of my work, or at least a particular strain of work that's been occupying me for much of the last 10 years. So I'm a writer, actually. It's how I think of myself. But because in the last few years, increasingly, I've been exploring, kind of another side of writing. We tend to think of writing when we hear the term as being this purely cerebral activity, right? We think of writing in terms of how literature is transmitted, reading a book, how it's an act of kind of knowledge transmission from mind to mind. But there's this whole other side of writing, which is the graphic or visual side of writing as well. And as someone who always kind of writes my first drafts by hand, I've always been a big notebook keeper. So this kind of like visual side of writing has been something that's always really interested me as well. So in the last few years, I've been doing kind of this calligraphic work as well that has been shown in various galleries and various exhibitions. And so I'm slowly kind of starting to accept, sometimes people call me a visual artist. And so I'm slowly willing to accept that as well. Not to get too far into semantics, but I suppose writing is an art form in and of itself. So I'm okay with that. But I do think of myself first and foremost as a writer. And, kind of my very early on, so my first novel came out when I was 23 in 2003. And right around that time, I also started writing art criticism for magazines. So very early on, because I was writing and publishing in what we might call traditional literary media, right? So I had my so-called creative writing practice over here, and then my so-called critical practice over there. So I was more and more kind of started to think, I guess my creative writing, my fiction always had sort of this critical elements deeply embedded in it, whereas my criticism was sort of open and flexible enough to include more playful layers and tonalities that we typically associate with fiction and poetry. So I started thinking more and more of ways that I might kind of combine these two sides of my practice, this so-called creative side, so-called critical side, and really like annihilating the border, that artificial border that separates the two. And so what I came up with was this idea of object-oriented writing, which is something that I started with about 10 years ago. And so it was, the idea was that, a kind of a new form of writing that would inhabit the work of art. In other words, the position itself within the work of art rather than writing about the work of art. Another way of saying it is kind of infesting the works of art with agency. In other words, if like this inanimate artwork could speak, what would it say about itself? Or another way of thinking about it is as a metaphysics of art writing, or kind of a recreative practice, just in the way, if you think about how nature poets, when they're not really writing about nature in their poems, what they're trying to do is evoke the essence of nature, when they go out into the field and write. And so I was kind of interested in trying to do that with works of art rather than with nature. And so my first major project in this vein was this work called 16 Sculptures, where I recreated in the medium of language 16 sculptures by different artists, kind of selected randomly on a whim from throughout the history of art, ranging from, the Venus of Willendorf, which was one of the earliest sculptures that, was ever found in the West, up to contemporary practitioners like Isa Genskin and artists like that. And so what I did was, so it existed in two forms. There was the book with the texts, and then there was an audio installation in a gallery, which you can see here, where you would put on the headphones and put on these sunglasses that completely blacked out your vision. So the idea is you would kind of recreate the sculptures in your mind based on my recreation of the sculptures in the medium of language. And on the right here, you see Colm Toibin, the Irish novelist, listening to, this was at the premiere of one iteration of 16 Sculptures at the Whitney Biennial in 2014. So that's kind of what the experience would be. So, so from there, I kind of, as I said, I've always kind of been a notebook keeper and interested in sort of this graphic engagement with writing. So some of my notebook pages actually, have like proper, I guess you could say, writing on them. And then some of my notebook pages would look like this. And so around this time that I was doing the object-oriented writing, I kind of got the idea to start doing this in like a bigger, in a bigger form, I guess, taking them outside of the notebooks and producing these like larger works on paper with a variety of materials. It's almost always on paper, the surface, and it's almost always ink. So I'm using like calligraphy pens, but also calligraphy brushes and Indian ink and so forth. So, so yeah, I think of this as kind of like, I call it kind of playfully like a form of bad writing, or kind of a writing of the body, a writing that goes beyond language as it's traditionally construed or thought of. And so I've showed these works, and they vary in scale. Some of them are quite large, like this one. This is a work produced for an exhibition, a solo exhibition that I had in Vilnius in Lithuania, and then some of them are quite small. This was actually like a wall painting or a wall poem, a wall piece of writing, you could say, that I did for an exhibition in Berlin. So yeah, these are more works on paper. So, so this is definitely a strand. So that brings me to sort of my commission for Parasite, for Liquid Ground. And this grew out of a conversation that I was having with Alvin while he was conceiving the exhibition together with Julian. He was aware of the fact that I was finishing this novel that I'd been working on for like 5 years called Settler's Landing. And so this novel, to kind of put it in a nutshell, it's about a billionaire who decides to buy his own private island, but and he decides to take it one step further and actually declare sovereignty and start his own country. And all of these bad things happen as a result of that. So, I mean, the book is about, I mean, it's about many things, but one of the ideas that it explores is kind of this idea of colonialism, the specter of colonialism as it infests kind of a lot of the history of Western literature, if looking at, I guess, to name some really obvious examples, books like Robinson Crusoe and or Treasure Island, this idea of, like going off and discovering exotic places with the, with the mysterious, exotic other, and the noble savage or whatnot, and sort of colonizing and disciplining the savage. So in some ways, the novel is kind of explores this colonialist impulse, I guess, from more of like a 21st century perspective. And among other things, so on this island, there, one of the practices, so this island, the original inhabitants of this island, which is kind of at a crossroads in this fictional sea, the original inhabitants were kind of half Creole pirates and half Chinese or East Asian pirates from the South China Sea, who kind of met at this crossroads, and they were kind of, and their offspring were kind of the original inhabitants of the island. And they developed this practice early on called mark making, in which kind of mocking, since most of these pirates were illiterate, that as kind of, they would kind of drunkenly mock the literary endeavor of civilized man by pretending to write in these states of, and these kind of ritualistic states of drunken revelry. And so my installation in the exhibition is essentially, I think of it as a work of fiction, because it's so what we did was, it comes out of this novel, this background that I've given you, and what we kind of do is kind of present sort of like, we wanted to kind of come up with like a fake anthropological museum or archaeological museum, as you often find in these sort of like very remote locales. And we had we hired an actor with a British accent to give it a really, sort of colonialist feel, to describe from, obviously from somebody from this outsider voice of the traditional practice of these Sagosians, because the fictional island in the novel is called Sagosia. So yeah, this was essentially a work of fiction in the space, fiction kind of coming off of the pages of this book, which has not yet been published, and infiltrating the gallery space with it. And so in addition to these works that were allegedly painted by these two brothers, these two Sagosian brothers in the novel, you have this audio guide that you experience in the gallery, which is loosely adapted from the novel. So I think that's it in a nutshell. If I'm forgetting anything, but
Thank you, Travis. I'll save the questions later, because I know around this work and your novel, there's also kind of research that you conducted around ideas of anarchism that are kind of embedded in these island cosmologies, but we can open it up later in the conversation. And I guess now it's Yixing's turn.
Cool. So I'll go try to share the screen as well. Travis, do you? Cool. Thanks. Cool. Can you see my image well? All right. So what I've prepared is a form of re-narrating the project I did for this exhibition from 2019. And this project is multifaceted. And in this situation, I'm thinking of creating a parallel type of narrative that can mirror both the creative process and also me recalling what actually happened during the time when I was making and working on this work. So that was in the summer and the fall of 2019. I was invited to the Aradinawan Island in Malaysia. Actually, Alice was there as well, so it's very nice to have that coincidence as well here. So when I first arrived on the island, and my very first observation almost was an animal that was cruising on the surface of water around the island, and also preying on the smaller fish, which is very curious because larger fish, they would usually kind of be submerged, right, and hiding and preying. I was very attracted to this animal because of its very slender form and also beautiful color as well. Their greenish backs and iridescent bluish fins. So I started asking around the locals what this fish was, and they were telling me it's called Julung-julung. And so I asked, oh, Julung? And they were saying Julung-julung. So there was that kind of reaffirmation of just the doubling of this name in the single name. And I found that very interesting. And just phonetically, Julung in local Malay language sounds like Jiulong in Mandarin, or Jiaolong in Mandarin, or even Golong, I guess, in Cantonese, which can be 9 dragons. And I've been to a few places named 9 dragons as well. So that got me very interested at the same time. I talked to a marine ecologist locally in Malaysia as well, inquiring about this origin of the name and what it meant. She said she didn't really understand the meaning of the name, but locals call that regionally. And it's a tasty fish, but usually the local fishermen kind of look down on it. And I actually sensed that because I was fishing with the local fishermen, and it's not a desired fish during the first part of my stay on the island. But later on, when the weather and tidal changes took place, the local fishermen were actually trying really hard to catch this fish for food. And they would, come back really disappointed, saying, they didn't catch anything. They would complain to me saying that, oh, no julung-julung, no dinner, no julung-julung, no eating. So the idea of making something maybe humorously as well as a lucky charm for the fishermen and for the island came to my mind. So this is at the very dock that people usually fish. And what we're seeing is the local fishermen using a sabiki rig, which is a string of artificial flies to use to catch the smaller fish, and then using those to catch larger fish such as julung-julung. And that's one such attempt was successful. So I was very interested in what this animal was and what it actually meant, right? I was doing my own research parallel at the same time. I saw this interesting sculpture at the Sabah Museum towards my end of the trip. And what you see behind is an eel caught from by a fisherman on the dock and later was released. And from the internet, it yielded some interesting results as well. One was at the beginning, which I really liked because it was almost so random and it talks to something that's really primordial. And when I put it in as the English for Malay shows up as joking around, I think that was almost perfect as well. So, on the island, the resources were very limited. I was looking up Aquatic Dragon, which is Jiaolong I just mentioned earlier in Chinese mythology, the figure that kind of hiding in deep water and sometimes emerge from those pools. I was trying to figure out what to make for my instrument. I'll talk about a little more later on. So these are some of the initial drawings. Hope you like them. And with the local 3D fabrication lab, we started working on a 3D model from a needlefish, because actually I did find out, you know, it's the type of needlefish that I was studying. And that was kind of the result as a 3D model. I was making this into a percussive instrument. So we were creating those chambers to produce different sounds. So when you knock on this instrument, you produce basically two types of sound. They're very simple drum almost. Julung-julung, right? That's what's happening in the shop later on. It totally changed, very different from what I envisioned. But the experience working with the technicians at the lab was very, very, very good, and actually made friends with them. I was there every day, and we're all handling this object and working on it together. Just wanted to share these images. Most of what you're seeing is not present in the work, but they do kind of embody the same narrative that was documented in the work. So that was when it was finished. We took a photo together as well. And we paid them a lot of cash too, thanks to the supporters of this project. And then we brought it back, the instrument, to the island. And I was installing the piece with the dog, and that's when it was finished. And, you know, the fishermen mostly and locals, they started interacting with this, the lucky charm. I was very happy about that as well. Not from an observer's point of view, but I was really one of them. We talked about this idea from early on, and they were really happy to see this actually being produced and installed in an environment that they you know, pass by and work on every day. And what you see behind is the mountain Kinabalu, the highest mountain, spiritual mountain as well, in Malaysia. So this island is not only a kind of idyllic island, it's also a place for tourist kind of leisure. So every day there are people coming in and doing tourist stuff and leave by the end of the day. And sometimes they interacted with the work as well. And one day someone broke it. Some tourist just, I think, put his whole weight onto Julung-julung, the aquatic dragon, but we fixed it later on. The other aspect is the rolling eye, I think. I just want to quickly mention. Usually it's an expression of contempt. And to tie this into this project, because a lucky charm is something that we actually endow with a certain type of magic power. And the creation and installation of that was really the process of creating a type of deity, I felt. And once such a thing is created like an idol in a spiritual context, you actually start to pick up more, maybe more power, and it got really out of control by the humans. So even gaining subjectivity and the ability to judge and to contempt even. So I was thinking maybe, at least when it was looking at the tourists doing repetitive stuff every day, almost like reincarnation, probably it felt speechless. And so I kind of tied in this rolling eye aspect into it, as well as to tie in some of the history that's most hidden on the island. It's not just a picturesque landscape. There's also a huge accumulation of plastic garbage on the other side, on the backside of the island. And there are also unmarked graves, lots of ghost stories on the island as well. Some of our residents, artist residents, had ghost encounters or experiences when they were visiting too. So I think for this, the object that we created, it probably had the ability or insight with the eyes to notice all those aspects that are not usually very visible. And so this is when things were more at ease, right? The tourists, they left the island, and the locals started to use the dock for their use, to repair and to relax. And I think it's at that point, the Julung-julung sculpture or object or idol is slowly gaining its solemn aura. It's probably the best state that it found itself to be situated in. Here is before a storm hit, and at nighttime as well. The only sound we were hearing is the tides and water hitting the shore of the island. And you see, that's when I left the island. Little Julung-julung still there, kind of perching top of the landscape, which is the city of Kinabalu behind. So how much time do I have left, Alvin? Maybe 1 or 2 minutes?
Yeah, I think it's fine if you go on for a few more minutes, if you want to talk about the two spatial objects before Alice.
Yeah, just to kind of lead to what I've been working on this year, and the objects that were shown in the Parasite exhibition as well. Yes, also partially due to the never-ending pandemic in North America, especially where I am, that I've been doing things at home, working on related matters, which were also present, but I didn't really talk about just now. For example, the changing ecology of the island, the very rich marine environment, the behavioral and morphological aspects of the beings living in those waters, as well as even just the very physical aspect of water in different bodies, in different geographical areas. And I started working on a series of objects at home, in my home studio called the Petrified Seas. Just a couple images to show you about this project. Is mostly made with resin and clay. Partially to construct a world, an underwater world that's solidified and certain things are preserved. So that's a very early example of, things from different time era, prehistoric, like a pterosaur and a helicopter. They were found in the same strata in a way. And these are all, I think I consider them to be scaleless sculptures that can be models for large installations that I'm kind of unable to make at this moment. So for example, here, that's a little figure. So you can kind of imagine the scale that maybe if conditions allow, I would realize. And also you see the choice of material, for example, resin that mirrors the geological process of sedimentation. It was poured in layers of encapsulating things, only a fraction of things that were able to be fossilized in a way, because in the process of fossilization or petrification, only very limited amount of things are preserved. So ultimately, this project is really about value and what gets preserved, and why certain objects or values and connections and relationships or even narratives are preserved. And of course, most are forgotten and fall into oblivion. And material play, I think, to keep myself entertained during this time. Yeah, I guess that's it. Just a little preview for these objects. And
thank you, Yixing. And I guess now we're on to Alice.
Okay, hi everybody. Do you mind stop sharing, Yixing, so that I can?
Oh, I think maybe. Oh, okay.
He's frozen.
I can do it. I just stopped his sharing. Did it work? Yes.
Okay. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay. So what I'm gonna do is give you guys a quick some background. Basically, Elvin, Julian, and we've been in conversation since I think January of 2020. Before they even submitted this proposal, as you guys even mentioned, that you guys have been in conversation for quite a while with other artists as well. And so it really got me thinking about the ideas that you were mentioning, especially things like material transformation, energy, and entropy, and this idea of like the sort of the idea of scale, actually, you know, in connection to Yixing's work. So I'll just share. So also just echoing what Elvin was saying, you know, my work is very much based on formal experience of the objects. And so right now we're all online and I haven't even been able to see the work. So it's really difficult to actually describe, you know, the bodily experience, the physicality of encounter. So you guys just have to take my word for it, I guess. Okay, so, whoops, this is not, sorry. Okay, so first I wanna just talk about this quote here. 1 second, wow, where is, okay, and then, wow, how do you, I'm sorry, you guys, it's blocking, the screen is black, and so I'm not able to see my mouse, so I can't see the quote. Anyway, let me stop share then. How do I even do that?
Maybe quit full screen, then you can see the slides.
Okay, oh, thank you. Can everybody see the screen now?
I think the share screen stops. Yeah.
It stops. Okay. I'm sorry, guys. Something's wrong with my computer. Okay. All right. Oh, here we go.
I think like this, it's fine. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. So size determines an object, but scale determines art. A crack in the wall, if viewed in terms of scale, not size, could be called the Grand Canyon. A room could be made to take on the immensity of the solar system. Scale depends on one's capacity to be conscious of the actualities of perception. And so this quote has been sort of almost like a guiding compass over the last, I guess, you know, 1.5 to 2 years, just in terms of thinking about scale. And to give you guys some background, during the conversations that I was having with Julie and Alvin, we were talking about this piece in particular, which is a table piece. Here's the actual table. And then on top of the table are these various elements: a prism, Crookes radiometer, handmade white gold porcelain tiles, air plants, fluorescent pink isometric grid, wet plate collodion photographs on mirror, and glass microspheres. And so the three of us were talking about this piece, and you know, when they brought up the idea of liquid ground, I was, you know, kind of just coming off of the tail end of making this sculpture. And for me, this piece was kind of like a new direction in my work, in thinking about how, first of all, a table as a formal structure can collapse a sort of variety of diverse elements onto the same plane. So in a way, you know, I still think of it as one sculpture, but it's, you know, constituted by, you know, many different things. Another thing that I was working with is the idea of the sort of invisible elements that are surrounding the object itself. So for example, the prism is, you know, a glass structure object, but what it does is it collects light, which is invisible, and then refracts it. And so it makes these images, or depending on when you're walking around it, it's refracting the environment, and creating, you know, rainbows. And so, you know, although we cannot see the light that's around us, it's very much there. Similarly with air plants, there's solar energy, and then the radiometer, for example, is turning based on thermal energy. So even though the heat is around us, we don't see it. And so I was very much thinking about the sort of the invisible dimension around the sculpture itself, and how the plane of the table can collapse both the actual elements and the invisible elements, and acts almost like a sort of miniature garden or some sort of landscape. So in relation to this idea of this, you know, scale, we're looking at it also just, the height of this table is up to your chest. And so you're very intimate with the objects. Your eye is almost touching the objects. And so the illusionistic plane is also very much at play here, because you're imagining, well, at least I'm imagining, entering into this miniature landscape. But then at the same time, it flickers outside of it, and becomes almost like a tableau vivant. But instead of people, they are, you know, these inanimate objects, or it could also flicker into like a laboratory table. And so from there, I started developing the idea. And to give you some context, you know, speaking about the pandemic, I was in Los Angeles during this time, and what I did was every morning I would go for walks by the Los Angeles River, and I don't know if anyone's been to the LA River, but it's quite a industrial place. So let me just show you quickly what it looks like. It's got these, you know, I mean, it's not really a river because most of it is empty like this. You probably have seen it in like movies where it's, you know, mostly these very industrial bridges. But at the same time, I don't know if this is it, but it's also got a lot of, you know, greenery around, and animals and plants. It becomes quite wild. It's right next to sometimes like an 8-lane freeway. At the same time, there's, you know, speaking of real estate development, they're trying to create like a really nice area around, like in one part of the LA River, where Frank Gehry is going to design this beautiful park, and then there's going to be condos, and there are already condos along the nicer parts of the LA River. And so during my morning walks, I would go through all the different sort of places, and every time I encountered this area in particular, and it's right at the tail end of this beautiful condo area with like exercise machines and a dog park. And then then you encounter this, and then you encounter like the 5 freeway with, you know, 18-wheelers passing by, and just, you know, a lot of like homeless encampments. And so this area, and there, you know, there's a crane and just wild birds and animals. And every time I come here, because of the way the light plays off of the river, and because the river is really got a lot of stuff in it, it's completely dark. And so it becomes this beautiful reflecting pool. And it's just so surreal. And it just struck me. So, you know, we've had a few conversations. So in Los Angeles, we went on lockdown in March. And then I was in conversation with Elva and Julian in January, and we were in a series of conversations throughout, you know, spring. And as we're talking, somehow this really entered my consciousness. And to give you guys some background about my work, so I make sculptures mostly, but I also make experimental films. And there is sort of like a dialectic between the film practice and the sculpture practice. And just to kind of quickly give you guys a sense of the sculpture practice. So this is the show that I had this spring. And this is the press release. And, you know, just to give you some idea of the materials that I'm using, here are some of the elements that I mentioned with this table sculpture. But I also use, for example, iron meteorites found in Egypt, or waveform fossils. And very much dealing with both the geological and the cosmic. And then with the film practice, and just kind of quickly show you, this is the film that I made for the exhibition, and it's called Pyramids and Parabolas. And this is episode number 2. It's basically an infinite film series. Here I'm digging a hole in the desert where I'm about to build a radio telescope that listens to the sun and Jupiter. And I'm sort of traveling through, you know, different parts of the earth. I went to the Tianyan fast radio telescope in Guiyang. And then this is the La Brea tar pits in Los Angeles, the Arctic, and here we have a dinosaur, and the Arctic, more Arctic. Anyway, just to show you sort of the kind of movement that the body makes through space. And I realized, you know, especially after making this piece, that the impetus or the inspiration from it was the movement of my body through the LA River. But just quickly to give you a sense, so because of the pandemic, obviously, you know, we're kind of restricted in terms of our movement. And I've been really into spinning at my gym. To give you a sense, so basically this is it's an AR, augmented reality spinning environment where there's a 270-degree video screen. And so you're spinning, and I kind of think of this as like almost like an earthwork, like a la Listen, you know, because you're like going through the landscape. And here we have, you see the arches making a reflection. It's really bizarre because at one point I, you know, finished the piece for Parasite and I was like, oh my God, I feel like I'm now biking in my artwork because of this. And I, you know, somehow this also entered my consciousness. And to give you a sense of like the variety of different landscapes that the trip goes through. So it's like cosmic, you know, and, you know, Arctic, you know, space, you know, I don't know, like tripping on mushrooms situation, just, you know, more arches. So anyway, so here we have, and, you know, talking about scale, I feel like, and the thing is I was looking for a video of this piece because like right now you're just seeing still images, but really the piece is activated through the movement of the body. and very much influenced by minimalism, which is very much about, where is the art? It's not actually in the sculpture itself, but it's in the interaction between the sculpture and the viewer. And it's that in between space where perception meets the encounter, where something unfolds. So I guess, yeah, this is sort of where I'm at. Yeah, also kind of bringing back what Travis was saying, the idea of fiction. And for me, I fully embrace the fiction of art. And so in Alvin's text, he mentioned, this sort of, the sculpture takes you into both an illusionistic space and a cosmic space. And it's really up to your imagination, but at the same time, like your body moving through the space or moving around the sculpture, that the work is then activated. So that's it. That's all I have.
Thank you, Alice. Thank you so much for sharing, and also to Travis and Yixing. I think it's really interesting, having the three of you today, because all your work in a way provide a very different kind of angle and approach to, I guess, ecological art as a genre, if there is one. As well, while we were conceiving this exhibition, we wanted to respond to this kind of problematic land reclamation project, but at the same time, we're also thinking about what, like, the issue of like environmentally engaged art, and if such art form merely serves a kind of political end, but what about the formal aspect of it? And I think each of you in your very own way provide a very kind of interesting approach to that. And I have a few questions for each of you. First of all, I think for Travis, it's really interesting that I think when you're talking about your object-oriented writing, you're thinking about writing as a form that kind of invests agency to art. And your work is calligraphic, and it makes me think about this kind of affinity between writing and art is very much kind of in the spirit of traditional Chinese literati painting, in which like calligraphy and landscape was practically inseparable since the Song Dynasty, right? But as a kind of this ancient Chinese tradition it is also a very kind of rigid and almost like authoritarian kind of system. And I know like your work, for instance, the kind of anarchist, this kind of underlying thread of anarchism that is in the series that you developed, there's some kind of anti-establishment sort of insurgency that's always kind of embedded in your work. So I wonder, like, in your calligraphic practice, how do you think about your work in relation to this kind of like ancient rigid like system of calligraphy? Yeah,
I mean, certainly since I first started coming to China, I mean, I now live in China, but I started, but I've only been living here for 2 years, but I've started visiting China 10 years ago. And, this was kind of concurrent with the period where I was first starting to develop this sort of body of calligraphic work on a more serious scale. And definitely, encountering classical Chinese painting, classical Chinese art, classical Chinese poetry, and certainly the ways in which all of these, sort of rigid to a Western mind, these categories are all sort of like rigid and very separate. Poetry is poetry and written and meant to be published in books, and and painting is painting, and art criticism is art criticism. And then encountering, the classical Chinese literati painting, that classical tradition where, often, right, there was no real difference between writing and painting in the minds of these people. Oftentimes poems would be inscribed upon the paintings, and furthermore, even art criticism would be inscribed on the paintings. You know, later owners or later collectors would sort of pen their own interpretation of the painting directly on the work itself. And so there is this remarkable fluidity there, you know, and which I think I've always been seeking as someone, you know, I guess what you kind of identify as kind of like an you know, sort of like anti-authoritarian aura to the work or whatnot, is really just kind of a fundamental desire to like break down these categories or these boundaries that you know, that so many people insist on, and really I guess that we're educated to insist on, you know, that this, you know, writing has to be this and art has to be this, and, you know, and never the two shall meet. So yeah, there's certainly that. As to your question of anarchism and how that comes into the practice, I mean, there's no you know, there's no formal connection to sort of classical anarchism, if what you mean is kind of like the theory of people like Goldman or Bakunin or whatnot. I mean, you know, one book I did read when I was sort of researching, when I was writing this book, you know, which for this exhibit, which, you know, I inadvertently ended up kind of integrating this calligraphic practice that I do into the fictional world of the novel and into the fictional space of the exhibition at Parasite. So one of the books that I read when I was kind of researching the book and formulating this the kind of historical mythology of this imaginary island, of this fictional island in the book, was by Gabriel Kuhn, who's identifies himself as an anarchist scholar. And it was about kind of the golden age of piracy. And it was like a really interesting book because, you know, as I said earlier, kind of the idea, the mythology of this island is that it was originally a kind of pirate colony. And so, and this book was really interesting because one of the, you know, what he tries to do in this book is actually demonstrate, you know, how, you know, pirates are kind of traditionally romanticized, I would say, by the radical left, and as a kind of, you know, form of like, you know, historical utopia, like, you know, oh, look, this thing happened in the golden age concurrent with the Enlightenment. It was kind of a counter model to early capitalism. And one of the things that he does in the book is say, well, like these guys men and women probably really shouldn't be romanticized as such, because I mean, they weren't necessarily the best people. I mean, yeah, they were kind of robbing from the rich and whatnot, but they were also, you know, raping and murdering people. So it's perhaps kind of foolish for us to romanticize them. So I don't know if that answers your question so much about, anarchism and or whatnot and its role kind of in this project, but yeah.
I know, yeah, but I mean, also, I guess the kind of in your fiction, the idea of Sagosia as a kind of pirate colony that was, I guess, from Creole and Southern Chinese pirate tradition, if I remember correctly. So, you know, when we're talking about this project, we're also kind of interested in, because the Southern Chinese pirate part that you kind of refer to is, you know, it was very much prominent in the late 18th and early 19th century, if I remember correct, early 19th century. And I think the most well known is this Chinese female pirate named Qing Shi. So we're, you know, thinking about this kind of this line in relation to the history of Hong Kong. And I guess the anarchist aspect, you know, while we were developing this work, I was also reading about the link between Taoism and anarchism. You know, there's kind of scholarly work that argues that, you know, a lot of it in it, and by that meaning a kind of anti-statist position. So, you know, in this exhibition, I guess this strand also is kind of in an interesting dialogue with works by Heidi and the future host, which very much engages with Taoist cosmology. Yeah, So and I have another question for Yixing. So I think, you know, Yixing's work is actually not commissioned, but when Julian and I were developing this exhibition, it was a very important work for us that kind of gave us a lot of ideas on how to open up this this subject. I think what's particularly interesting about Yixing's approach is that he took a very kind of artistic, almost idiosyncratic way to approach what could have been a very kind of theoretical, almost anthropologically interesting subject. Because if we think about, I mean, the kind of trajectory of the movement of Julong, be it the fish or the language, it also kind of reflects the kind of trajectory of globalization. At the time when I saw Yixing's work, I started reading about kind of the relationship between spirituality and religion in Southeast Asia. I guess before the age of globalization in these various kinds of in different coastal areas, there were local gods that were kind of identified as like the guardian of these different bodies of water. But until globalization, when world religions came in, these gods, smaller gods, were kind of replaced by the larger religions that that were identified with the open sea. One thing in the work is that I think, you know, you make this instrument that you give to the people, and it kind of touches on the idea of a kind of reciprocal exchange, and it sort of suggests, you know, a way of kind of restoring some kind of relationship or equilibrium between, you know, humanity or civilization and nature. But at the same time, you have this kind of eye rolling, almost this contempt that you kind of talk about, which in a way suggests otherwise, you know, not the kind of equilibrium. So I guess could you talk a little bit more about this kind of aspect of the content and eye rolling? What is that? What are you trying to say with this?
Yeah, I think the eye rolling part was it really changed even while you're watching this film as it develops. It was more directly relates to the Julung-julung's maybe unsympathetic gaze over the landscape, over the oceanscape. But later on, it was also abstracted into a more formal play with other visual aspects in the film. But in terms of contempt itself, I think I mentioned briefly early on in my presentation that even there's a prejudice and contempt for Julung-julung from the fishermen, because that wasn't, you know, praised as the best fish to catch for dinner. But as well, I think it was really when the object of Julung-julung gained its subjectivity, the deity gained its power, it is kind of off the leash of the human beings, and it became an idol. I think it was partially inspired as well when I saw the shrine on the island that they were worshipping local gods. And that was an interesting discovery because the shrine was relatively hidden, and before I was shown, I didn't notice it for many days, because from Malaysia, I know that most of the population, they're Islamic, but they also believe in the gods that are tied to Buddhism and Taoism actually as well. I found that very interesting, this polytheism coexisting in people's minds, and that was maybe arrived at an equilibrium. So I thought maybe I could not to add another spiritual entity there, but I think I was compelled even spiritually to do this project, maybe as a subversive act on my own end, because I have a very strong scientific background, and I'm also an atheist, I think. So developing this project was actually a quite strongly spiritual experience, because I really felt, as I said, the object was influencing me as a person. And I think it was not only just about love and care originally intended, but also it has its own sovereignty.
Thanks.
I might also have a question for Alice. That it's interesting that you mentioned Robert Smithson at the beginning of your presentation, and we when we were writing the long curatorial text for the booklet, we tried pretty hard to kind of associate, say, minimalism or land art like that high modernist era, the thoughts, the practice, the art, kind of the Kunstwille of that era to your work and Li Kai-chong's work. I remember I tried multiple times and I delete all those. That I think the remainder is, say, I think like the side. I think the what's remain is the side non-side dialect. I think, but before I tried like Michael Fried, the theatricality and everything, but I just crossed all those. And so I see your own kind of, you mentioning these, and I was just wondering your own take on like your artistic like inspiration, especially from that era, because I think it's also I kind of see the lineage, the strand, but it's also quite different because it's not that like kind of overtly confident or indulging as that those like people. So I'm just curious about your own take on this like association. Yeah.
May I ask, when you say indulging, do you mean like navel gazing sort of kind of indulgence? Is that what you mean?
Or kind of about, say, Smithson or like all these, they are like they had their methodology or their kind of philosophy of art, but they are extremely confident and like they believe that. But I think yours are more delicate and contains a element of kind of it goes forward and backward at the same time. It's like I think that you work around these objects, not just had this like overt confidence, almost hubris about the materiality as what they did. Maybe not a very good description, but that's like in my.
Yeah, no, I definitely know what you mean. And it's interesting because in 2014, with some friends, I actually took a road trip to visit these places like Michael Heiser's Double Negative, Robert Smithson's Spiral Jetty. And, in my own travels through different types of landscapes. So when Yixing mentioned Mount Kinabalu, I climbed it. It was a 2-day summit, and so both, moving through natural landscapes that are massive in scale and also these, earthworks, they definitely sort of stand in stark contrast and just, become so minuscule compared to this larger, sort of cosmic nature. I think for me, it's very much more of the, I'm just more of inspired by these people. And I think what they did was they opened up the space for me to then engage in this conversation, but definitely I'm not interested in reproducing what they were doing. But at the same time, I'm interested in forwarding, my experience. And of course, I don't want to essentialize gender here, but my body is different than his body. For example, I don't know if you guys ever seen the Spiral Jetty, the film itself. It's very different. And I think for me, the film is actually much more interesting than the actual land art. But this, for example, Spiral Jetty is actually not just the work in the land on the Great Salt Lake, but it's also the essay Spiral Jetty, and it's the film Spiral Jetty. And so I would say Smithson's actually a much more complicated figure than, let's say, Michael Heiser is, because of also his writing practice. And so, so I think I'm interested, and the mythology, of course, it's there, and it's, I have to accept that it's there, but so yeah, that's the one part. And then, going back to this idea of minimalism and modernism just in general, is that I think for me, I'm kind of, I'm sort of like, I don't know how to say it. Like, it's funny because I was talking to a friend of mine, and there's this really lovely Chinese word called jian. And I really like that word. And I feel like I'm kind of jian. And for whatever the reason is, whatever that's popular, I kind of want to go against it and be jian. And so I would say that for me, my education was very much about, because when I went to CalArts, for example, it is a postmodernist school just to start with. So you don't learn how to make anything, and everything starts from a critical theory. And so for me, it was just so stifling. And part of the reason why I became an artist was to explore my body and my emotions and intuition. Not to say that's the only thing that I care about. Of course, I read different types of literature, right? Philosophies, whatever, but that's not the only place where I'm interested in operating in. And so looking back, what I would like to reclaim in terms of modernism is its spirit of material, process, and formal experimentation. The idea that art is an autonomous object, that it's its own thing, and that art is not necessarily referential, that it's pointing to something, and art is not, the function of art is not only to critique, that it doesn't become instrumentalized for some other ideology. These are all very important values to me as an artist. And so I don't know right now if there's space for that, especially of the climate that we're in, but that's still, where I'm coming from. So, yeah.
Thank you so much.
I think it's really interesting that, what you just said really helped us put your work more into context, thinking about your kind of homage or relation to minimalism, or kind of these strands of modernism as a kind of counterposition to how art or like kind of more mainstream strands of art, how they're analyzed today. One thing, when Travis was talking about this kind of like colonial exploitative aspect of nature writing, it really, and then, both you, Yixing, and it just hit me that, especially that both of your works came out of this residency program, that was kind of, where I guess, in this kind of really tourist island, and artists go there and they're expected to kind of make a work, and with this, with that art kind of landing some value to this, I just thought it was, Yixing's work found a really interesting way to respond to that, this gifting of this lucky charm, building an actual kind of, I guess, relationship with the fishermen. And, I think also in Alice, I know you also have, you also run this arts, I guess, art space in the deserts, right? So just thinking about this kind of counterposition, I wonder how the operation of the art space, aside from your identity as an artist, how the program at your art space function as a kind of alternative model. Yeah, if you can share your yeah, your work.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, I realized, you know, actually like Los Angeles itself, although it's changing, you know, quite quickly over the last couple of years, the spirit of LA is very much about sort of this sort of, you know, grassroots self-organizing, you know, trying new things. And so for the Magic Hour, for example, is this little space in 29 Palms, so adjacent from Joshua Tree, in the Mojave Desert. And my co-organizer and I, Ben Tong, we basically do these sort of 2-month-long exhibitions outside. We built this structure made with scaffolding material. And part of the reason for using scaffolding, so you basically, in Asia, the scaffolding is actually bamboo, which is even more interesting, but we weren't able to source that. So we used the metal ones as sort of a temporary structure that is flexible enough and not so permanent, so that you can really kind of change its shape as an armature to hold objects. But then eventually, after this third exhibition, so in the beginning it was a lot of just experimenting with outdoor sculptures without any conceit or sort of a mission statement, or, you know, even a curatorial statement. We basically, for me, out of selfish reasons, I wanted to see how other sculptors dealt with material and form in the, you know, outdoors. But then eventually it became sort of almost like a, you know, speaking of Smithson again, like this non-site where we actually had, you know, one artist do a, he basically turned this armature into a, like, you know, a rocket launch. So we basically had a miniature rocket with psilocybin mushroom in the payload, and then he launched it into the atmosphere and then spreading psilocybin. And then we had, you know, a psilocybin ritual that lasted into the evening, and it was, and so the energy itself started to spread, you know, in this very sort of ephemeral way. So yeah, so in that sense, I mean, we're very much next to, for example, the high desert test site that's run by Andrea Zattel, and she actually was quite supportive and has come to some of our exhibitions. But I don't know if you guys have heard, though, the high desert test site is kind of dismantling, and that Andrea Zattel herself has decided to no longer make objects. So yeah.
Thanks, Alice. We're actually 15 minutes past the run event, so I guess we, I wonder if any of the audience have any questions. If not, I guess with great sadness, our exhibition will close in a week, and with great sadness that none of us were able to see it, but you know, the exhibition was very much intended as a kind of platform for us to work with different artists, new works, and last year during the pandemic, we were able to collaborate to establish a partnership with UCCA so that the exhibition will travel to UCCA Dune in March 2022, and meaning that we'll actually be able to see the second iteration of the show. And all the 3 artists that are with us today, all their works will also travel to Dune. So I hope that some of the audiences here, whether here right now or that will be watching this video when it's uploaded to YouTube, will either have seen the iteration at Parasite, or will be able to see the show while it's at Dune. So thanks everybody for joining us. Thank you, Travis, Alice, and Yixing for your presentation and sharing your work with us. And thanks.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
See you. Bye.